When I first read the reading from Deuteronomy this morning, the line that struck me the most was that Moses was buried and no one knew where his grave was. In this time when funerals are held on Zoom or on YouTube Live or distanced or without anybody there at all, when people are dying in hospitals and at homes with no one with them except perhaps maybe a nurse or a chaplain on a telephone, that line just really seems to speak to our times. And so I spent my week looking at this lesson from Deuteronomy. It is the end of the book of Deuteronomy. It is the death of Moses, of course, Moses being the author, as most Jews would have you believe, of the first 5 books of the Bible. He's an old man. He's spent the last 40 years, a long time in the desert with a recalcitrant people who left slavery joyfully, but with deep fear in their hearts and with no idea what was coming after that time, in which at least they had a roof over their heads and at least one meal a day, even though the work was hard. And as they traveled through the wilderness in this long time, it was at least 30 years, we think, they died out. And of course, they were buried where they died. And so Moses isn't the only one whose grave wasn't known. All of those who died on the journey were buried wherever the tribe was at that point, and then they were just left behind. In that time, a new generation was born. A new generation grew up. And not long before they got to Mount Nebo, or Moab and Mount Nebo, Moses had let the Lord know that he was tired, that these people had worn him down, and he just didn't know how much longer he could do this. And God said to him, well, raise up somebody else. And so he did. He raised up Joshua, son of Nun, laid hands on him, anointed him as the next leader of the Israelite people. And today, at the beginning of this reading, God has come to Moses at the top of Mount Nebo, and they are looking out over the land into which the people will be going next. That area which is no longer wilderness, but will now be home to them. And God says to Moses, here I am showing you this entire land, but you don't get to go there. The people will go, but you will not go. That seems so harsh to us, that after having led the children for so long, having brought them up and fed them and made sure that God didn't wipe them out, which God tried to do on more than one occasion, being their advocate, being their leader, being their prophet, being the one who spoke with God on their behalf and to them on God's behalf, to tell him that he doesn't even get to enter the promised land is just a harsh, harsh reality. Most scholars believe it's because when he struck the rock in the land of Zin to bring water out for the people, he usurped God's authority and claimed that it was his own authority that did it. But we don't know that for a fact. Of course, none of us know anything about this. And so here's my suggestion, and it is just a suggestion. Moses was part of that old generation. Moses was the last of those who came out of Egypt. Granted, he was taken into Egypt by God to bring the children out, bring the people into the wilderness. He was the last of that generation, and the new generation needed him not to be there. At some point, it became important that Joshua take full responsibility for this group of people, that Joshua become the leader, not a leader, not the one who's going to lead us next someday, whenever that happens to be, but the leader who is going to bring them into the promised land and establish the tribes. I like that idea because I understand, you'll note the gray hair, that at some point we all need to step aside and let the younger generations take over. Now, you might say that the election next week would deny that. But I think if you look down ballot a little bit, you'll find out that the younger generation is coming up. And that soon, maybe not in the next election, but soon, there won't be anybody at the top of the ballot who has hair the same color as mine, because it is becoming time for the next generation to move up, to take charge, to put their ideas into motion, and let those of us who have been, we think, running the country for a long time, maybe let us actually retire. Now, you may not be aware of it, but a new report came out about the Episcopal Church not too long ago, sometime in the last 2 weeks, and it was dire and it was dreary, and it said by 2050, all of our churches will be closed. There will be no Episcopal Church. That seems very strange to me, not because I can't imagine a world without the Episcopal Church, but because I read too much from the leaders of the Episcopal Church, one of whom has hair just as white as mine and is known well to all of us. So I went to the Episcopal Church website and I started listening to our presiding bishop. And I cannot imagine that anyone hearing his message, hearing his words, hearing the work he is doing, interviewing people all over the country about the way of love, can possibly think that there will be no new generation which will rise up. And then I looked around at the number of clergy in the diocese I still reside in, even though I live here in Columbus. My residence is in East Tennessee. I cannot tell you the number of clergy that have been raised up in that diocese who are under the age of 40, and many of them under the age of 35. The church is not dying, but the church needs to give voice to these younger clergy, just as we in the church here in Columbus, not just St. Philip's, but all churches, need to be paying more attention to the young people who are sticking with us, the young people who are still coming, who still have a voice, and yet somehow we don't always listen. Moses needed to step aside. Joshua needed to step up. We need to let the younger generation step up. We need to allow the church to move perhaps in a direction that we might not be comfortable with, but is maybe where God is calling the church to go. We need to continue to do the good work that we have been given to do, because that is what brings people into the church. That is what says to people, there's something going on here more than just saying prayers and singing hymns. And quite frankly, it's the saying those prayers and singing those hymns that brings a great many people in the millennial generation into our churches. They like our services. They like our hymns. Sometimes they might even like the sermon. But they have an affinity for that ordered style of worship, that language that harks all the way back to our beginnings with Thomas Cranmer. We might not say thee and thy so much anymore, but the prayers haven't really changed that much. The amount of Bible we read in the Episcopal Church is an incredible thing. Not many other churches read the Bible as much as we do. And there are Episcopal churches, I will tell you, that don't read all the lessons every Sunday, particularly in this land of COVID. They've cut it back. They take a lesson out saying, oh, it's Zoom. Nobody wants to hear 3 lessons in a psalm. And I'm going, oh, yeah, they really do. We really do. We need all of those lessons. We cannot not hear the story of Moses. We need to hear the words that Paul wrote to the Thessalonians, and we of course have to hear our gospel. And even the Psalms bring us hope and joy, perhaps at a time and with words that we just hadn't thought about. Moses did exactly what Jesus told him to do. He loved God, but in stepping down, in dying, he loved his neighbor. He loved his neighbor Joshua as much as he had loved himself, because he knew that Joshua was the one who would lead now. He had confidence in the young man. He expected that the promised land would be full of the people of Israel because of their leader. So as we go into an election, and we do see our white-headed leaders there at the top of the ticket, look down the ballot. Look around our cities and our towns. See the young people who are interested in politics, who are interested in doing something maybe a little different in our country. Listen to them. Counsel them. Ask questions. That's what Jesus wanted us to do. Don't just take it the way it's handed to you. The scribes and the Pharisees and the chief priests didn't have all the answers. We have to search those answers out. And in this day and age, it will take all of our generations to rise up, to raise up, to come together into what it is God is calling us to be next.